Good day everyone. At this point, we will discuss the 8 methods address learners' diversity in an English class. And these methods are grammar translation method, direct method, audiolingual method, community language learning, silent way, Suggestopedia, and language experience method. But let me discuss first the first method, which is grammar translation method. Grammar translation method, translating words with your used language into English to differentiate its meaning. So this grammar translation method are not translated sentence by sentence, but instead it is translated word to word. So there are main feature of this method, and these are: it focuses on reading and writing. Second, uses vocabulary words. Third, develops students' reading ability to the level where they can read literature in the target language. And last is develops students' general mental discipline. So here are one of the examples that you can use in the classroom settings. So you can ask the students to take down their conversation using their native language, then translate it into English. So with that, students can identify or differentiate the meaning of the word based on the language they use. So here are some of the strengths in using grammar translation method. First is helps teacher much to clear the meaning of the word and sentence of the students easily. Second, students understand the things very easily if taught is using this language. Third is students learn easily. If there are strengths, then of course there are also weaknesses in using this method, and one of these is the main focus remains only on the mother tongue and the target language remains ignored. Second, the students don't develop the power of thinking in the target language. And third, no oral works takes place in the classroom due to this method. Here are also negative effects on pupils' motivation. First is, they fail to learn the difficult grammar rules of the target language. Second is, there is no interaction between the students and the teacher. Third, cannot master all the 4 skills, which is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. The main purpose of this grammar translation method is to learn a language in order to read its literature to benefit from the mental discipline and intellectual improvement. The background of this method is, it was designed according to the faculty psychology approach, which was very popular during 18th and 19th century. It was contended that mental discipline was essential for strengthening the power of the mind. And the rest 7 methods are to be discussed by my crew members.
What is direct method? The direct method is a method in which a new word or expression is connected in the pupil's mind directly with what it stands for and not through the medium of vernacular. Direct method is also known as the natural method. Why? It is because it looks to the process of first language acquisition to set the context and techniques for the second language acquisition. When we learn our mother tongue, we didn't go through to the grammar lessons and translations drills. The direct method focuses on full immersion in the classroom environment where not one word of the student's native language is spoken. So, the focus here is not on grammar, but instead on learning through listening and speaking. Here are the principles of direct method. First, oral work. In oral work, speech is very important. The direct method lays stress on the oral aspects of English. The child about first listen and then speaks. This will develop a language sense among the children. Oral teaching will also form the basis of reading and writing. Second, minimum use of the mother tongue. Make as little a use of the mother tongue as possible. The sound of the mother tongue should not interfere with English sounds. This will ensure the direct bond between experience and expressions between words and meaning. Use mother tongue only when it is most essential to use it. Third, the sentence and not the word becomes the unit of speech. The direct methods follows the principles that the unit of speech should be sentence and not the word. We talk and think in sentence or sense group. We do not think in a single words, so sentence is made the unit of speech. Fourth, the teaching of descriptive grammar. Grammar is not the thought of sake of grammar. The direct method aims at teaching the grammar of language or the grammar that describes the language in actions. The grammar thought is not grammar of rules, but grammar of use. Grammar is taught indirectly. The last principles, which is progressive teachings of new vocabulary. The direct methods stresses the need of using only limited words and phrases. The words and phrases are taught of definite stage through spoken language. Thus, teachings of vocabulary is progressive. Here is an examples of direct method. The direct methods actually list the major cash receipts and payments on the statements of cash flows. For example, cash receipts are often listed from customers, commissions, and tenants. Cash payments are usually broken out into several categories like payments for inventory, payroll, interest, rent, and taxes. Categorizing these inflows and outflows can be time consuming since they are not categorized like this on any other financial statement. These are the advantages of the direct method. First, the learner receives more input in the target language than when the language is instructed in their native language. The next is the learner creates direct associations between words in the foreign language and concepts in their mind, actions, situations, instead of indirect connections via words in their native language. This can be important when words in the target language are difficult to map to words in the native language. Lastly, classes have few students. There are also disadvantages of the direct method. First, the small class size made direct method unsuitable for public education. This method may not hold well in higher classes where translation method is found suitable. And the last is some concepts are difficult to explain without recourse to the learner's native language. However, if an occasional translation is allowed, this not be a disadvantages of a direct method. So, when there is a big distance between the learner's native language and the target language, certain aspects are difficult to explain without using the learner's native language. This is especially the case of the grammar and certain communicative and cultural subtleties. At the early stages, the learner simply lacks the vocabulary to understand these aspects when they are explained in the foreign language.
So, as I assign the third method, which is the audiolingual method, let me ask you first, what is audiolingual? Okay. Audiolingual method, it is based on behavioristic theory that advocated conditioning and habit formation models of learning that we perfectly in keeping the mimicry drills and pattern practices of audiolingual method. Audiolingual method or ALM advised that students should be taught a language directly without using the student's native language to explain new words or grammar in the target language. In addition, uh, audiolingual, it is method of foreign language teaching which emphasizes the teaching of listening and speaking before reading and writing. It uses dialogue as the main form of language, presentation, and drills. as the main training techniques. Also, mother tongue is discouraged in the classroom. However, unlike the direct method, the audiolingual method did not focus on teaching vocabulary. Rather, the teacher drilled students in the use of grammar. The audiolingual method, or ALM, has its objectives. And its objectives are enable the students to learn how to use English in everyday oral communication, to encourage the students to produce utterances with accurate pronunciation and grammar, and to grow the students' ability to respond quickly and accurately in speech situation like the native speakers. The objectives of audiolingual really helps to enhance and develop the vocabulary and grammar of students. Also, it enhances the oral communication and speaking of the students. These are the example patterns used in the audiolingual method. First, repetition drill. Repetition drill students are asked to repeat the teacher's model as accurately and as quickly as possible. This drill is often used to teach the lines of the dialogue. So, the purpose of this drill is to enable the learners to internalize the structure or grammatical categories introduced in the lesson. Example: Teacher, the cat is under the table. Students, the cat is under the table. Second, the chin drill. A chin drill allows some controlled communication, even though it is limited. A chin drill also gives the teacher an opportunity to check each student's speech. A chin drill gets its name from the chain of conversation that forms around the room as students, one by one, ask and answer questions of each other. The teacher begins the chain by greeting a particular student or asking him a question of the second student, and the chain continues. Example: Student 1, where is the cat? Student 2, the cat is under the table. Student 2, where is the cat? Student 3, the cat is under the table. And continue. And the third one, or the last one, is the single slat substitution drill. The teacher says a line usually from the dialogue. Next, the teacher says a word or a phrase called the cue. The students repeat the line the teacher has given them, substituting the cue into the line in its proper place. So, the major purpose of this drill is to fill in the slot of a sentence. For example, Teacher, the cat is under the table. Students, the cat is under the table. Teacher, chair. Students, the cat is under the chair. Teacher, dog. Students, the dog is under the chair. The audiolingual method has also advantages and disadvantages. First is the advantages. Medium-sized classes can be used. Much practice of listening and speaking can be used at elementary and intermediate levels. Learners can form grammatical accurate language. And this is the disadvantages. First, fluent and confident teachers needed. Repetition can be very boring and meaningless. Little exposure of spontaneous or authentic speech. And reading writing are neglected and not treated as independent forms. And that's all for audiolingual method. Thank you for listening.
Good day, everyone. Today I will discuss the fourth method, which is TPR, or also called Total Physical Response. Who is James Ussher? James Ussher is a professor emeritus of psychology. He developed a total physical response method. And now, let's proceed to the definition of total physical response. What is total physical response? Total physical response is a method developed by James Ussher in 1906. It is said there that it is anchored on the trace theory of learning. Trace theory proposes that the more frequently a memory connection is made, the easier it is to recall it. For example, if a student is given the verbal command, like for example, sit down or stand up, they will quickly learn what stand up means. Total physical response claims that the memory is increased if stimulated. When we say stimulated, it is to encourage interest or activity in a certain person. The memory of a learner is increased if there is an activities included in the class. Any activities that will boost or increase the memory of a learner. In this method, it demands listening and acting. Both learners will listen and act. That depends on how or what the teacher will command or say. In this method, the teacher is the director and the students are the actor. If what the teacher will command to the student will act or perform it. This method also has share of negative points. It seems effectively only at the beginning levels of language proficiency, but it may no longer work as students advance in their communicative competence. Later on, I will discuss the weaknesses of total physical response. This method also is theatrical and dramatic appeal to language. When we say theatrical, it is something theater, and dramatic is when the learner will identify with rules and situation to be able to engage with, or the learner will explore and understand the world they lived in. Next to be discussed is the main features of TPR, or total physical response. First is teacher directs and student act in response. So when the teacher gives a command to the student will act in response to that command given. So the teacher directs and student acts in response. Second is comprehension is developed through a body movement. So we can comprehend if a student or the learner will move or will follow or act the command given by the teacher. We can see that, oh, that student is standing, that student is picking a paper, or that student is dancing, something like that. So we can comprehend it through doing or through acting, through
body movement, facial expression, or something that we can understand what he or she is doing. The third is listening period helps learner ready to speak. If a student or if the teacher will give the student enough time to perform or to act his her given command, then that period helps learner ready to speak or ready to perform. The meaning is more important than form. Knowing the meaning is makes you or helps you understand what that form is going to express. Next is the learner is listener and a performer. So both learner is listener and at the same time a performer of the given command by the teacher. So if the teacher will say stand up, you will listen and then perform what the teacher said. Next is spoken language is emphasized over written language. In this method, it um, it is more on verbal command, which is the teacher will say and then they will say instead of writing it on the board, writing it on the paper, something like that. It is directly said by the teacher, and then the student or the learners will perform or act what a teacher said. The last is the role of teacher is central. It is said that the goal of the teacher is to let or to help student understand and to let the student learn effectively by gathering all the information, the knowledge they have to share it to the student or the learner for the student to learn effectively. In this slide, it shows there the strength of total physical response. First, it helps student immediately understand the target language. So when the teacher command stand up, then the learner or the student immediately understand what the teacher mean. So they will act or they will perform it in the way they can. Next is it does not require great deal of preparation. So for example, if the teacher is giving a command to the student like stand up, then the learner, the student will stand up easily or the student will stand up automatically because it does not create or it does not deal of preparation. This method is fun, easy, and memorable. Yes, especially to the student in elementary, like they are more on um, playing, they are more on activities that can boost their energy. Next is helps learner achieve fluency in learning language, especially when the teacher is repeated the command many times. Next is a good tool for building a vocabulary. And now, let's proceed to the weaknesses of total physical response. Total physical response could be a challenge for shy students. Next is it can also be boring in class. If this method is well always used in class, some of learners find it boring. Another weaknesses is it is not very creative method because the teacher will just command or will just say a word that the student will act or perform. Another is it's not flexibly used to teach everything. This method is just to hype or to boost the energy of the student. Next is it is limited and no convenient method. When we say convenient, it is not suitable to use that method. Next is target language are not or not suited to this method. It is the same as limited and no convenient method. The last is overusing of TPR causes someone easily bored. Here are the 7 concrete examples of TPR or total physical response. First, teacher command stand up to the student. Second, teacher let student sing any song. Third, teacher command sit down to the student. Next, teacher command move forward to the student. Teacher command move backward to the student. Teacher sing head, shoulders, knees, and toes. Last is the teacher let student stroll around the classroom.
The next method that I will going to discuss is the CLL method or the Community Language Learning Method. But before we start our discussion, let me ask you first, what is the CLL method? Okay. The CLL method was developed by Charles A. Curran. It is also known as concealing learning. When we say concealing, it means one person giving advice to another person who has a problem. It is a good method to practice listening and speaking. CLL also defines the role of the teacher and the learner. The teacher as the counselor and the learner as the client. From there, we can see the relationships between the learners and the teacher, the dependency and dependency relationship. CLL is an example of humanistic approach since it deals with the emotions and feelings as well as with the linguistic knowledge and behavioral skills. When we say humanistic approach, it is a technique that blend what the student feels, thinks, and knows with what he or she is learning. Humanistic techniques engage the whole person, including the emotions and feelings, as long as the linguistic knowledge and behavioral skills. Whole person learning means that the teachers consider not only their students' intellect, but they also have some understanding of the relationship among students' feelings, physical reactions, and desire to learn. The community language learning method has 2 interactions: the interactions between learners and the interactions between the learners and knowers. The interactions between learners. The learners are intimate as they become a community of learners and they decide to be a part of this growing intimacy that pushes learners to keep pace with the learning of their peers. The second interaction is the interaction between the learners and the knowers. In this interaction, it is initially dependent when the learner tells the knower what he or she wishes to say in target language, and then the knower tells the learner how to say it. CLL combines innovative learning tasks and activities with more traditional ones, and they include translation, tape recording, reflection on experience, and group work. In translation, the students form a circle, and the student speak out in his or her mother tongue, and then the teacher translates it into the target language. In the tape recording activity, the students speak out in their mother tongue, and then the teacher translates the language chunks into the target language. The student repeats the chunk into target language, and only the target language production are recorded. In the reflection experience activity, the teacher takes time to carry out various activities, and the students allowed to express how they feel about the activities, and then the teacher indicates understanding and empathy. The last activity is the group work activity. In this activity, tasks like discussion of a topic, preparing conversation are given. Then the students work in small groups to complete a task and present it to the rest of the class. Advantages of the CLM method. It works well with lower levels of students who are struggling in speaking English. It also creates warm, sympathetic, and trusting relationship between learners and teachers. It trains students to become independent. Counselor allow the learners to determine type of conversation and lower students' anxiety and overcome threatening affective filter. The disadvantages of the CLM method. Some learners find it difficult to speak on tapes. It is time-consuming to carry out, and in order for students to become independent, teacher might neglect the need for guidance. Teacher has to be highly proficient in the target language and in the language of the students. Community language learning method is a psychological counseling techniques to learning. It is based on humanistic approach which blend what the student feels, thinks, and knows with what he is learning. The learning takes place in a communicative situation where teachers and learners are involved in an interaction. The key feature of this methodology is that it has flat orthodox language teaching and developed from outside language teaching. They are all rigidly prescriptive and emphasize the learner's responsibility for their own learning.
At this moment, we are going to learn about the silent way method in teaching language. First off, what is silent way? Silent way is a method of language teaching devised by Caleb Getachew. Getachew views language itself as a substitute for experience. So experience is what gives meaning to language. Getachew states that the method is based on the constructivism theory and leads to the learner develop their own conceptual models of the language. It is based on the premise that the teacher should be silent as much as possible in the classroom. In this method, the learner should be encouraged to produce as much language as possible. The teacher roles. Teacher acts as a facilitator. The main goal is to teach the language by letting the students test down the linguistic choices. Next, teacher acts as a neutral observer. Teacher does not have to provide negative feedback. According to Stivic, silent way teachers' tasks are to teach, to test, and to get out of the way. The students' roles. First, students are expected to develop independence, autonomy, and responsibility. Second, students are expected to participate in class actively. They should be willing to make mistakes and to be corrected. Thirdly, students are involved in verbal interactions and peer correction activities. Students must learn to work collectively rather than competitively. The silent way is characterized by its focus on discovery, creativity, problem solving, and the use of accompanying materials. Richards and Rogers summarized the method into three major features. The three major features: first is learners discovers or creates rather than remembers and repeats what is to be learned. That means learner needs to discover or create. Next, learning is facilitated by accompanying physical objects. So learning is made easier by the use of physical objects such as Kusinari rods. Thirdly, learning is facilitated by problem solving, involving the material to be learned. So learning also made easier by problem solving using the target language. There are few methods using teaching silent way. First is the sound color chart. Each color chart representing the sound in cognitive language or any second language. Next, the Kusinari rods. It is used to demonstrate most grammatical structure such as tenses, verbs, and prepositions. Thirdly is the Fidel chart.
The Fidel chart is a chart presenting all the possible spelling to be found that the language using the same color code is the rectangular chart on word charts. For more clarification, let's proceed to the example. So how is the silent way applied? Here is an example. Small color rods are used to introduce vocabulary colors, numbers, adjectives, verbs, and syntax including the tenses, comparatives, pluralization, and word order. The teacher provides single word stimuli or short phrases and sentences once or twice, and then the students refine their understanding and pronunciation among themselves with minimal corrective feedback from the teacher. The chart introduces pronunciation models and grammatical paradigms. So from this example, it is clear that the students are taught independence and responsibility. And now, let's proceed to the next slide, which cover the strengths and weaknesses of this method. Here are the strengths. First, it fosters cooperative learning between individuals. Second, it embodies a new approach to education in general, a respect for individual and an awareness of the individual extraordinary cognitive powers. Her weaknesses are: for some teachers, the rigidity of the system may be meaningless. Another is learners hard to understand.
Suggestopedia method. Suggestopedia method is a language teaching method originated in the 1970s by psychologist Georgi Lozano. The main purpose of this method is to create a learning atmosphere with the help of some factor like music, decoration of the classroom, and so forth, which pupils could process great quantities material if simply given the right condition for learning. Suggestopedia method states of music relaxation and giving over of control to the teacher. Example of music relaxation was a Baroque music. Baroque music was central to this method because Lozano believed that the soft playing of Baroque music increases alpha brain waves and decreases blood pressure and pulse rate, where pupils tend to acquire relaxation of mind and gain comfortable learning setting with Baroque music. Why the name Suggestopedia? The name combines from the terms of suggestion and pedagogy. The main idea that being accelerated of it is that learning can take place when accompanied by the suggestion of psychological barriers and positive suggestion. To this end, lessons take place against a background of soothing music in an emotionally comforting environment, with the teacher actively planting and implanting thoughts in and from the teacher's mind. Features of a Suggestopedia method. First, Suggestopedia method uses target language or mother tongue, teacher-centered, bright, cheerful classroom with comfortable chairs, soothing background music, reading of dialogues by teacher, reading and intonation matched to music, classroom activities plays on dialogue, including a question and answer games and song. Advantages of Suggestopedia method. First, classes are held in ordinary rooms with comfortable chairs. Second, students remember best and are most influenced by information coming from authoritative source, which is the teacher. Third, double bluntness theory, which is it refers to the learning from two aspects, which is the conscious aspect and the subconscious one. Fourth, peripheral learning. Suggestopedia encourages the students to apply language more independently and takes more personal responsibility for their own learning and get more confidence. Disadvantage of Suggestopedia method. First, environment limitation. Most schools in developing countries have large classes. Each class consists of 30 to 40 students, where Suggestopedia method consists only of 12 students in the class. Second, the use of hypnosis. Some people say that Suggestopedia method uses a hypnosis, so it has bad deep effects for human beings, but Lozano strongly denied about it. Third, infantilization learning. Suggestopedia class is conditioned to be childlike situation. There are some students who do not like to be treated like this, as they think that they are mature. Example to illustrate the Suggestopedia method in the classroom. This method is used to read a story and make your students listen to it carefully. After that, you can ask some questions related to the story and they have to answer them. During the reading, there has to be a soft background of music.
And for the last is the language experience approach. The language experience approach is a whole language approach that promotes reading and writing through the use of personal experience and oral language. The language experience approach integrates speaking and listening, reading, and writing through the development of the writing text based on the first-hand experience. These are the principles of language experience approach. When a children's language and experience are accepted as a starting point for literacy, learning to read and write is easy. When this is not the case, learning to read and writing can be difficult. Language experience exploits the two major resources. Children process their language and experience is in one of the most efficient ways to integrate reading and writing. These are the main features of language experience approach. All communication skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking are integrated. Difficulty of vocabulary and grammar are determined by the learner's own language use. Learning and teaching are personalized, communicative, and creative. Following activities to be done in the classroom. First is sharing experience and discussion about the story of a person's life through object and image. Second is the role play. It's a full-field activity. Students are made into separate teams. Each group will introduce a dramatic event of conversation based on the book. These are the advantages of the language experience approach. An increase in student content knowledge and skills. Statistically, higher outcomes in application of coursework to everyday life than comparable students not engaged in experimental learning. And improve higher order thinking skills and ability to demonstrate greater complexity of understanding. Statistically significant increase in ability to analyze increasingly complex problems. Significant increase in students' critical thinking abilities. And these are the disadvantages of language experience approach. Number one, a decentralized approach can seem less orderly and it may be less comfortable to an authorized style teacher. Number two, it requires more preparation by the leader or the teacher and may require more time for processing. And the last is, playing an active role in the learning process can lead the student experience greater gratification in learning.